Non-Monogamy Help is a podcast where your questions about polyamory, open relationships, and non-monogamy get real answers. Your host, Lola Phoenix, is the author of The Anxious Person's Guide to Non-Monogamy and has been answering listener questions since 2019. Names and details are changed to protect your anonymity.
Hello and welcome to episode 188 of the Non-Monogamy Help podcast. I'm Lola Phoenix. Please send your questions to ask@nonmonogamyhelp.com and they'll either be answered in the podcast or the column anonymously. You can read all the columns and listen to the podcast at nonmonogamyhelp.com. Sign up to the emails I send out on Wednesdays by going to nonmonogamyhelp.com/email and follow Non-Monogamy Help on Instagram at nonmonogamyhelp and on TikTok at nonmonohelp. And if you are an awesome person, you can join the podcast shoutout support tier, and then I will, with your permission, read your name at the end of the podcast. So before we get to this week's question, I'm going to do a discussion question, which, if this is the first time you're hearing this, every week before I read the letter, I do a discussion question that you can use to get to know your friends, partners, metamors, or anyone else a little bit better. I also try to answer it myself briefly, though I sometimes fail, to give you a little bit of context. This week's discussion question is still a polyamory conversation card question from Otter Being, and these are pretty cool cards you can get to help you get to know people, and they're very much more polyamory themed rather than, a general relationship question theme. So it might be a thing where, it's more for people in your relationship rather than a parent necessarily. But hey, who knows? I don't know what kind of relationship you have with them. Anyway, this week's discussion question is, in what ways does your partner dating others influence how you feel sexually? I don't know. I don't think that it's necessarily has a huge impact on me personally. It's kind of just like, yeah, if you want to do that, go ahead. I don't really mind. If I find the person that they're attracted to attractive, that is helpful. That is nice. I'm not going to lie. That's what we call the jackpot. And if they are also that's a good situation. And that's a happy situation, but it's not always necessarily the case. But yeah, it doesn't necessarily affect me. Because I guess at the end of the day, I kind of feel like, yeah, maybe there are some ways that they're comparing me to the other person, but I can't really control that anyway. And if they genuinely don't like me or they genuinely don't, I feel like if they're doing something with somebody else that they enjoy, then they should tell me, not necessarily because, that person won or anything, but just because I also want them to have a good time. And I don't know, if they think somebody else is better and they don't want to be with me, then all right, fine then. Go on then. This isn't a prison. I'm not keeping you here. So yeah, that's just kind of how I feel about it. All right, that's this week's discussion question. In what ways does your partner dating others influence how you feel sexually? Let's get to this week's question. I'm a 52-year-old cis white male, and I only recently realized I was bisexual. When I say recent, I mean a year ago. I've been immersing myself into queer culture, reading books, and working with my therapist. There are a lot of concepts which I'm discovering and figuring out that many of them resonate. I spent 50 plus years hiding these feelings away, so they all feel so new to me. I've been married to a straight woman for 20 plus years now, and for the most part, I've had a wonderful life with her. The goal is to stay in that monogamous relationship, at least physically. My wife does not like emotional or intimate conversations, so we have not done that for as long as we have been together. As part of my journey, I am realizing that not only do I like those conversations, I crave and need them. As most people in my generation, I was taught that once married, your spouse is everything, and having friends, especially female, is not a thing to pursue. With lots of help, I'm breaking out of that mold. I am making close friends, lots of them being in the community. I have 2 friends which I consider a level above others. Both of them are female and married. One is bisexual and one is straight. The bisexual one is also polyamorous. My first thought about polyamory is nope, not for me. I have since realized that was decades of monogamy and patriarchy talking. I know now that if my wife were okay with it, I would for sure explore the physical side of polyamory. That is not going to happen, and I know that being with someone without her consent is cheating, not polyamory. So I am resigned to not go down that path. What I am thinking of is a term I have heard but struggle finding much information about. The term is emotional polyamory. For me, I view this as having multiple people which I can share my innermost feelings and thoughts with. Someone whom I know has my back and we care for each other greatly. It's a person for whom I love and feel an immense connection with. Essentially, it's like describing a partner but without the sex part. Is this a thing? I am sure that I'm not the only one. I think this is because when I first realized I was bisexual, I felt that my story was so unique. Then I realized, nope, it's very common. The problem is no matter how much I research, all I find are situations about the physical and emotional side connected, none where one exists without the other. Any advice or feedback would be greatly appreciated. Before I get to this week's answer, I want to quickly remind you of this episode's sponsor, BetterHelp. Quite often in a lot of my columns and podcasts, I encourage people to seek a polyamory-friendly therapist. And for a lot of people looking locally for therapists who might be supportive of polyamory can be impossible or out of their budget. BetterHelp allows you to find therapists online that you can send messages to at any time of day, and they do also offer some financial aid. You can get 10% off your first month by using the promo code Non-Monogamy Help or going to betterhelp.com/non-monogamy help. Let's get to this week's answer. So there's a lot of things going on here. I think in general, what you're describing is what most people today would just call a friendship. It's not really emotional polyamory. What you've described in terms of the way that marriage used to be seen, and also I think the fact that you are pretty closeted, is what facilitated this type of connection with your wife, one where you don't have intimate or emotional conversations. You couldn't have those conversations, it sounded like, because you were kind of hiding away part of yourself. It actually was better that your wife didn't want to have these emotional conversations with you, because then you might have come out a little bit sooner in a way. And your definition of monogamy and marriage and the way that this is structured has been one where, as you said, you don't have other friends. You don't have other intimate connections. You don't feel strongly for anyone but the person that you're supposed to have this romantic connection with. And that isn't actually the case for a lot of people. And that isn't a good thing that I think people, even people who are monogamous, should strive for. I think people should have strong, intimate friendships with other people. And actually, way, way back in the past, in Greco-Roman times, if I remember correctly, romance was seen as a sickness in a way, and that the bonds of friendship, and especially between men, because, you know, that's how they were seen as more important and more higher in a way than the bonds of romance. I'm a relationship anarchist, so I don't personally believe that one should elevate any relationship over another. I think the only time when you should really prioritize one relationship over another is if you have a child, because that child literally relies on you to survive. But in any other case, I don't think that friendships should be necessarily less important than romantic relationships. And you might benefit from doing a little bit of research into relationship anarchy, because that might be actually what you mean, is that you have strong friendships. But the thing that's a little bit not so relationship anarchy here is you saying that the goal, you also like prioritizing your friendships, saying that like some mean more. And it's fine to like feel more intimately close with other people. That's not what relationship anarchy is, saying that you have to feel intimately close with everybody. But those people that you have strong intimate connections with, they aren't necessarily always prioritized, or you don't like consider them to be better in some way than other relationships, if that makes sense. But your goal here, you said, is not to get rid of this monogamous relationship. And whilst I'm not trying to encourage you to break your 20-year marriage, because I understand why you wouldn't want to, it worries me a little bit that that is your ultimate goal. Because really, I think what your ultimate goal should be is learning more about yourself and being able to be yourself and being able to experience the things that you want to experience that you haven't been able to experience because you've spent years, decades literally, hiding from who you are. And so I think that that should be your goal. And I think that, you know, there are plenty of examples, like there are asexual people who are polyamorous, who have strong romantic connections with people who they don't have any sex with. But you're not asexual, presumably. Maybe you are. You don't really explore that in this letter. But I don't want you to self-impose asexuality or a type of asexuality onto yourself purely because you're too scared to end this marriage that you have. And that's what I'm kind of worried about, is that, you know, are you doing this because you're too scared to be alone? Are you doing this because, you know, like you and why can't your wife be one of your great, amazing friends that you're close with? What is it about, like, why can't you end that friendship, end that like marriage, end that agreement between the two of you that you can only have sex with her, and maybe you don't have sex anymore, and then you're free to do what you like physically, but you still have that strong, intimate connection with her as a friend. Do you have a strong, intimate connection with her? Or has it just been that the society that you've been in has told you that you have to be in this relationship? You've been in it. It's worked very functionally well because you've been hiding yourself. And then now that you're hiding yourself, you're finding that, oh, actually, I can't have a strong, intimate, close connection with my wife because she doesn't want that for whatever reason. And the only reason we've been able to be together is because I've hidden who I am. Like, that's kind of the thing that you have to answer for yourself. And what I would hope that you don't do, because you've already spent 20 years hiding and lying to yourself and being someone that you're not. And it sounds like you're going through all of this exploration of who you are. And that's really freeing and that's really wonderful and that's really awesome. And I don't want you to continue on a path of basically prioritizing everybody else, including the culture that's told you that you have to do these things, over what you actually want in your own heart. Because, like, why is the ultimate goal to save this partnership? Why is the ultimate goal not to make sure that you're taken care of, make sure that you're happy? And I know that might sound selfish. I know. And like, we're not always going to be fully happy. Happiness is not like the end goal. That is like a feeling that comes and goes. And sometimes we sacrifice things for friends, not just in romantic relationships. You know, being in community is not about everything being copacetic and happy all the time. Sometimes it's about, you know, getting up at 3 a.m. because your friend calls and they're drunk and they're sad and they don't have a ride home and going to pick them up. Like, sometimes it is about sacrifice, but it's also not about hiding yourself. And it's also important for you, maybe for the first time in your life, to actually go, do you know what? Fuck what society has told me that I should have. What do I actually want? What's actually important for me? Because my worry is that I say like, yeah, you can have close, intimate friendships with friends. That's fine. But two things about that might become the problem. One is if you've never talked with your wife about what defines a relationship. If you don't have close, intimate conversations, you know, cheating and what people consider cheating, there's obvious examples of that, like you actually sleeping with another person, but people can feel cheated on in lots of other ways. And I think that people need to actually talk and come to an agreement, even in monogamous relationships in this digital age where you can see people and like their, you know, like people consider their partner liking somebody else's, liking a sex worker online, like following a sex worker online and liking their pictures as cheating. And some people don't. So like, you have to have some type of conversation about what is actually cheating, because you might be working on a definition of like, well, if I don't have sex with anybody, then it's not cheating. But that's not necessarily going to mean that's what your wife feels. And does your wife know, hey, I really want to have these deep, intimate, emotional conversations, and we don't have those, and I actually need that? Have you given her a chance to actually provide that for you? Have you let her know that this is actually something you're finding that you need? And maybe she's fine with you having close, intimate friendships with other people. So that's one thing. And then the other thing that I'm kind of worried about is like, you're like, well, if I were allowed to be physically with other people, if you were allowed to have sex with other people, I'm going to make a wild assumption, and I might be wrong, but I don't know, that you're now bisexual. You haven't had sex with a man. You want to have sex with a man at some point. Like, let's put all the cards on the table here. You know, I have personally, when I came out as bi ages ago, I was like, well, I haven't had a girlfriend and I want to have a girlfriend. I want to have a sexual experience with a woman. Like, I knew that at least, if not have a girlfriend, I wanted to have a sexual experience with a woman. And I was interested in this guy and we were talking and I was considering dating him. And this was even before I knew anything about polyamory. I was like, look, I'm bi. I haven't had sexual experience with a woman. I want to have a sexual experience with a woman. Is there any opportunity down the line? Like, is there a threesome potential situation? Is there any opportunity for me to be able to have that experience if we end up being together? Because he was monogamous and I thought I was too at the time, or I was okay with monogamy at the time. And he was like, no, I don't ever want that. I'm never ever going to want a threesome or have any kind of experience like that. And I was like, well, then we are not dating, because like, that sounds harsh and it doesn't sound like a quote unquote good enough reason to not date somebody, or a quote unquote good enough reason to end a relationship. But at the end of the day, I knew that at some point in my life, I had not, because of all sorts of reasons, internalized homophobia, whatever, I had not had a sexual experience with a woman. And I knew that I wanted to have one. And I wasn't going to, just because I had met somebody that I did genuinely like. He was a nice guy. We had some great conversations. I did really want to be with him, but I knew that eventually at some point in my life, I was going to be like, I want to have this experience and I can't. And I just wasn't willing to say no to that. I wasn't willing to say no to that forever for the rest of my life. So are you willing to say no to that forever for the rest of your life? And that's like a really difficult conversation because it's all well and good now. Like this sounds so bad. This sounds so much like the forbidden fruit. And I'm really trying not to make it sound that way. But genuinely, like you have those intimate, close friendships now. And that's satiating now because you haven't even had that. But that will become your norm. That will become what you should have had. And the new thing which you hope to expect from people, because I don't think that's a wild thing to expect from a friendship or from a marriage or from a relationship. And my fear is that you're going to get to a point where you're like, actually, I do want to have physical experiences. And this will become a long, drawn out thing when it doesn't have to be. Like, and I think people sometimes they're afraid to break up. They're afraid of, especially if they have a very long relationship that they've been in for decades, sunk cost fallacy, afraid to be alone, especially if they've never been alone. Also dealing with the fact that you're bi, like coming out, it's a lot, but dragging out of like, oh, I'm just wanting to be close with people. Oh, I'm just like, actually, I think I do want to have sex. Like, I think it would be easier in a way if you just were as honest as you could be with yourself. Like it might be you're like, you know what, I'm bi, but like I'm perfectly fine like watching and watching porn or whatever, and like I don't need to have sex with another man. I'm fine if I died and I never had sex with another man, I won't feel like I won't regret that. That might be you, but it might not be you. So I think you need to have a real honest conversation with yourself about what do you ultimately want. And I think you should be real with your wife. Like, honestly, like I think this is going to become a struggle, Like I said earlier, I think that the reason why you were able to go for 20 years without having emotional, intimate conversations and why this has been a thing that's been lacking in your relationship, I think, could be wrong, is because you've not been yourself. And now you're stepping into who you actually are. And it's going to be, I think over time, the more it's sort of like, how do I say this? A crumb seems like a feast to a person who is starving. But then when you actually start to get the meals that you deserve, a crumb is starving. So I think it's going to become difficult for you because this is something you need. And point blank, you are not getting it from your wife. Now, I think you should give her a chance to be able to do that. This could also be a wonderful exploration journey for her. Maybe she's bi. I don't know. Like, you never know. Maybe she would benefit hugely from this opportunity in her life to become closer with her emotions, to become closer to you. This might be, it could end your relationship. It could be the thing that draws you even closer because she actually is you are being honest with her. You're being yourself fully with her and you're saying like, this is something that I need. So like, please, I want to stay with you. So please help us get to a point where we can, be together because I don't want to lose that. And I think that you should be like full honesty with her because especially if you've been together for 20 years, especially if you don't want to break up, like if you should be fully honest with anybody, it should be her. So yeah, I think to answer your question, which I feel like we've gone way off the course, which is as per normal for me. What you're describing is a friendship. It's not really emotional polyamory. Like it just depends on how people define it. And I would really, really, really want the future that I want for all monogamous people is I really want a future for them where they're allowed to have intimate, close relationships with their friends. I don't want this form of monogamy. I think it's so bad for monogamous people to do exactly what you described, where you like you're not allowed to have friends sex is somehow, the sex of the other person somehow matters in terms of whether or not you can be friends with them. The whole concept of like your romantic partner is the only person that you're allowed to have any connections with. Like, I don't want that for monogamous people. You don't have to be polyamorous. And I don't want a future where we the idea of a monogamous person having close, intimate friendships with other people is so anti-monogamy that it becomes defined as polyamory. I don't want that. I don't want that at all. Like, this is just being friends with people. This is what people should do. And so I'm going to push back a little bit on that and say that it's not polyamory, because polyamory is specifically the intention of having multiple romantic relationships with people. They don't always have to include sex, for sure. Asexual people can be polyamorous, but they are romantic relationships, generally speaking. In some way, they're romantic and deep, and some aren't deep. Like, it depends. Like, but like it's that intention, right? Is generally polyamory. And I'm really worried that you're trying to basically get as close to like what you want, when really what you really should do is have this conversation with your wife about what you really need in your relationship with her, and give her the chance. Give her a chance to rise to the occasion, because she's spent 20 years with you as well. And this could be a great opportunity for her to have these conversations with you. And if she really, she should be trying as hard as you are to meet you where you are. Do you know what I'm saying? It can't be just that you're doing all of this kind of like, oh, I'm learning who I am and I'm trying to find a way to define this so that I don't have to end my marriage and all this. She has to also try to understand who you are now and to, try to be closer to you. I think that she should try to do that. And I think that that's important. So yeah, I hope that helps, and good luck. If you're a little overwhelmed by all of the reading you seem to have to do when you start off in polyamory, it's a lot. And did you know that the top 5 books that people usually recommend when starting off in polyamory have around 1,700 pages to read? And if you read at an average pace, or you try the audiobook versions where applicable, that's about 45 to 55 hours of reading. And some of these books don't have any exercises, or they're not necessarily for people that are just starting out. And that's a problem. Even though I'm an author and I think it's great for you to read books, I decided to put together an audio-based, self-paced course for people starting out in the fundamentals of polyamory. It's specifically designed for people to help them get started right away, rather than spending 6 months reading and not doing any actual engagement or practice. There are fun exercises. Well, there's exercise. I don't know if they're fun. There's exercises. There's downloadables. You can get involved as much or as little as you'd like. And there's also office hours with me that you can have. So if you would like to learn more about the course, you can go to polyamoryfasttrack.com. All right. Thank you for listening to episode 188 of the Non-Monogamy Help podcast. If you want to be awesome, you can sign up on the website to support me by going to nonmonogamyhelp.com/subscribe. And you can sign up to the podcast shoutout support tier. And that means that I will, with your permission, read your name at the end of the podcast. And that's what I'm going to do right now. My current podcast shoutout supporters are Mike Kender and Claire Nilo. And if for whatever reason you can't support economically, there's so many things you can do. There's a free tier you can sign up to at the same address. I send out an email on Wednesdays that sometimes has discounts and stuff whenever I get them at nonmonogamyhelp.com/email. You could take a screenshot of the podcast and share it to your stories and tag me, and I will be so grateful. Also, if you review my books on Goodreads and wherever you get books, that's super helpful. You can also rate and review the podcast on iTunes and Spotify. That's all for this week. You will get a new column next Friday and another podcast episode in a fortnight. Thank you so much for listening. You've been listening to Non-Monogamy Help. The music was done by Chris Albury Jones at albury-jones.com. Thank you for listening.